please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. El-Sulaiman. I will be staying here sitting and not going up. With all that insights into Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries, what can I add? I can only add a perspective from the outside because you know the inside. It is important that we do understand, as you have correctly pointed out, that our economies are connected nowadays. They are extremely connected. But we don't really behave in the way as they are connected. We're still holding conferences, and we need to have these conferences because that's where we exchange, because we're very far away from one another. We don't want to accept that frequently, but we're farther away than we often think. There are international corporations, but these are like their own cultures in this world. But the people we have in these companies working, they have a root, and that root is somewhere in a culture. And that's very correct, as you pointed out. What do we as educators know about business? Well, at least we know the people we educated who are working in these businesses. And that's the contact, because the process in a company is only as good as the people who are working on these processes. So I think the human being is really in the center. But I don't want to start with the human being. I want to start with the economy, as we always tend to look at it, and then later come on to the human being again. If you're looking what is going on nowadays, then you're seeing that companies are less and less doing their own operations. We're outsourcing. And there are so many companies out there who are doing almost nothing anymore. There's a report about an India telecommunications company who grew that fast that they decided to outsource just everything. If you look at Apple, if you look at Amazon, you can set up a business that actually Amazon runs for you, but it's a different name. Consider this, what that means. It means that we're treating a company as a company with all the operations, but in fact it's not. So we have to understand that. And these operations are going somewhere around the world. We also have that trend that we're saying we're only doing what we're good at. The rest, let others do this. This has been the paradigm for the last 20 years. But what that creates is a really long supply chain. Because when we're just doing, oh, I don't do that, let somebody else do that. And then you tell somebody else, if you're not good at it, you choose who you want to include there. Then these chains become extremely long. They become complex because you find out somebody is better than the other one that you had. And now sitting here and saying, who is actually involved in the creation of the value that I eventually sell to my customer becomes a question that you cannot answer. That's one of the big threats that the big brand companies are facing because they don't know. They know for some chains, but for most of the chains, they don't know. And I'm saying there's this term of supply chain management. If we don't know who's involved, I call that not supply chain management. I would call that supply chain hoping. But I don't know how many people are paid for hoping. So we have to somehow change that in order to get our hands back onto what's going on there. Because if you're a brand owner, no matter who, if something goes wrong, people will address you, not your supplier. Eventually, you hold it. If you're driving a car and the brake system fails, you don't care about who made the brake system. You care about who gave you the car. So you have to really know and understand it. So supply chain management becomes a core function. Reflect in most of the companies. I'm not saying on GCC countries, just everywhere. Supply chain management, what's going on in the 70 to 90%, for the case that I gave you, 100% of the value added, is managed by procurement. And most of the time, procurement officers are not sitting in the management board. In the board of directors, you find almost nobody who really understands what's going on. We're running an economy without having the skills to really run it anymore. The finance industry was the same thing. We didn't know where actually the trouble was going on. That's why people were so hectic and saying, where is really the problem? The same thing applies to physical things. And we have to think about this. So one of the leading companies are establishing at the moment supply chain management competencies in their boards. And this is one of the big things we need to do. And it just applies to around the globe. If you look at the stakeholders, there's a lot of buzz about stakeholder management out there. And most likely one of the biggest or most important stakeholders is the consumer, because he eventually buys our product. Well, the only thing is, if I made a promise, I have to walk my talk. And I do have to walk my talk, and nobody cares about who does that. So when we make a promise, we have to deliver to that promise. And if this fails as a consumer, I'm just blaming the brand of saying, you don't know what you're doing. That's not something we want, because a brand has only value that it gives you a sign that you can trust. That's all what a brand does. But if we know that you can't trust, then the value of the brand's gone. You refer to CSR, environment, let's call it sustainability. There's a lot of investors who require nowadays that there is some sustainability in the companies. And I don't want to get into the discussion about what sustainability is or not, but they require that, by whatever that means. That means we have a growing side of investors who want to know whether we know what we are doing. Again, this means that we have to manage what's going on. This again goes back to the global supply chains that I was saying, because most of the stuff we don't do ourselves, but still investors will look at it. They ask us to really know about it. So here's, again, a gap between what is the reality and what we are asked to do. The public is increasingly strong. We have seen that in many countries now, that people get organized and they are expressing what they think is the right thing to do. Again, this is not about me judging whether this is correct or not, but the people is getting more powerful and more powerful. So the people decides about the legitimacy of action. And if a company acts in a way that the public says is not legitimate, not illegal, but illegitimate, they will fight against it. But we need this legitimacy. We need it in order to have consumers, to have people working for the company, to have communities around to accept them to actually be there. And that means that this legitimacy needs to be justified by the activities they're doing, and that includes collaborations around the world. So this spans again back to the global supply chains that we're having. And we also have to consider that national regulations are spilling over by that fact. If most of our production, value creation, is done in other countries, regulations of these different countries all of a sudden become interlinked. Not by those who make the regulations, but those who have to act upon these regulations. So as a business leader, it's not enough to know your national law, but you have to know the national law of the countries you're dealing with, whether they are suppliers, customers, or even upstream to sub-suppliers. You're actually held responsible for compliance to these laws. That's a different situation we're facing nowadays. So that means with 60 to 80% also of problems occurring beyond our suppliers, in the sub-suppliers in these long chains, we somehow need to grasp beyond that. And I was very happy when you mentioned the relationships. The only way to do that is by establishing stronger relationships. Our spot market focus, where we're just looking for the cheapest price, the best deal, is great, as long as we know the standards and we are aligned. The moment we are not aligned, the spot market will give us a miserable deal. And for all of those who have done these miserable deals, you know, you get a good price and later on you find out how much work you have to invest into that relationship. Eventually you end it because you say it's better to end it here and go out again. So the relationship gives you the opportunity for a longer term to get aligned, to know what one another means, and to communicate correctly and go in the right strategic direction. That means we have to align in the chain upstream and downstream. And let's not forget, supply chains are highly reactive. So if regulation changes, if knowledge changes, these material flows, these production sites that we're using, these logistics hubs that we're using, and I get logistics hubs are pretty important for Gulf states nowadays, they may change within seconds because the value added done there can be quickly moved to somewhere else. I don't know where. It just means if that changes, and it can change simply, It just means we need an alignment, a long-term relationship. Makes you aware of what's going on. A spot market relationship just takes it away by the second. Well, what are the challenges then to the leaders? And I can't say, as you have done so brilliantly, Dr. Sulaiman, about what the problems of the people are. Let me focus on the challenges the people are facing. Is if you want to excel in a corporation nowadays, you have to solve exactly those issues. But the structures, as I pointed out, are not there. So if you're saying we have a supply chain problem, go to your supply chain director. But this person is most likely not reporting directly to the CEO. And if he does, he's most likely not as powerful as those who are doing chief technology officers, chief marketing officers, and so on. So you're just a tiny little player in that game for probably the most important question to be solved. And this is something that requires some skills to somehow still make it happen, because these people understand what the real problems are. So they have to find their route through the organization. Requests from foreign business partners are far from our current business and cultural practices. As I pointed out, our cultures are very different. And we somehow have to start in that discussion. We need to set the objectives where we want to go. There won't be a certification of being the perfect CSR company or being the perfect, because what is perfect? It's not defined. But there's a way to get there, and we can't copy. You pointed out the training centers. It's not about repeating what others are doing because they don't fit into the culture. It is a common process of understanding what the requirements are and the development of what the basis and the root, the cultural root, and the society actually has. So it's not about copying, it's about understanding and jointly developing. And I guess many of the organizations have understood the problem, but they're also struggling in finding the right ways to go there, whether it's the ILO or others. It's easy to say where we want to be, but it's very hard to say how to get there. And also, the tools and the concepts that are required for these business leaders are in their infancy. So when we're saying the education is right, I have to say, I don't think their education is right, because as an academic, I can tell you we know very little about it. We're about to embark into this research to understand that, but it is not something that is disseminated to everybody in the education. And that's why I actually give out that call to you. Join our discussion. We have created a group of academics out there in this world, around the world, from different parts, India, South America, Asia. I guess there's nobody from the Gulf regions there. There is somebody from Africa, to understand what is going on and how we as companies can make that happen. And we need this understanding, and we need it in particular in a global discussion from the different cultures, because this is not something we can direct out of a country or out of a nation. This is something we have to do in a discussion, in a long-term collaboration. Thank you.